Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to decode some of the most intense, high-stakes messages ever written. We're talking direct communications to communities under some serious pressure.
Just imagine for a second, what if you got a performance review, but it was from God? I mean, a totally direct, no-holds-barred evaluation of your community's strengths, its fatal flaws, and exactly what you need to do to survive. We're talking zero vague feedback, just boom, piercing insight. Well, believe it or not, that was the reality for 3 early Christian communities in what we now call Turkey. I mean, the stakes couldn't be higher. They were trying to exist in a culture where not worshiping the emperor wasn't just rude, it was treason. See, for Rome, this wasn't just about religion, it was a pledge of allegiance. It was the political glue holding the whole empire together. Okay, so let's get right into it. Here's what we're covering. We're going to break down these urgent messages from the book of Revelation, messages that were part warning and part promise.
So first things first, we got to get this straight. These letters, they're not some dusty abstract theology. No way. These were direct interventions sent to real people in real cities who were struggling day in and day out with how to live out their faith when the world around them was, well, hostile.
All right, let's jump to our first case study, the church in Pergamum. Now you have to picture this place. It's a huge hub for Roman power, for pagan religion. The letter even calls it the place where Satan has his throne. Whoa, that's some heavy language. Basically a metaphor for just how intensely opposed the city was to their faith. So what was their deal? This right here gets to the heart of it. There's this massive tension. On the one hand, they get praised for being tough, for standing strong against all the pressure from the outside. But, and this is a huge but, they were super weak when it came to the corruption that was festering right there on the inside.
And check out this paradox. It's pretty wild. They had people in their group, like this guy Antipas, who literally died for what they believed in. They were willing to go all the way. And yet, as a whole community, they just couldn't bring themselves to kick out this dangerous ideology that was poisoning them from the inside out. It's a huge contradiction.
Okay, so this name, Balaam, it's not random. You got to understand, it's a code name, a really powerful metaphor. When the author uses that name, he's basically screaming, hey, you have someone in your group doing the exact same thing that led our ancestors straight into disaster. They're teaching you it's okay to just blend in with all the idol worship. It's a serious accusation.
But here's the flip side. For anyone who said no to this compromise, the rewards were huge and super symbolic. They were promised hidden manna. Think of it as ultimate spiritual food from God himself. And they'd get a white stone with a new name. This was huge. It was like being declared not guilty in the highest court in the universe. Total vindication.
Okay, next up, Thyatira. This was a busy, blue-collar city known for its powerful trade guilds, kind of like unions. And here was the problem, the real dilemma. If you wanted to work, if you wanted to make a living, you had to join a guild. But joining a guild meant going to their feasts and rituals which honored pagan gods. So you had this direct clash between your faith and your wallet.
And you know, this is what's so tragic about Thyatira. The church was actually doing great. It was growing in love, in faith, in serving others. I mean, if you looked at the stats, they were thriving. But there was this one single tolerated problem. A really charismatic but corrupt teacher. And that one person threatened to bring the whole thing crashing down.
And just like we saw with Balaam, this code name, Jezebel, oh boy, it's a massive red flag. Calling someone Jezebel is like dropping a bomb. The author is making this incredibly damning comparison, linking this teacher to one of the most notorious villains in their entire history, a queen who systematically pushed the whole nation into idol worship.
And the warning here? It is severe, and it's personal. The imagery is of Christ with eyes like blazing fire, who sees right past all their good deeds, straight into the compromise hiding in their hearts. And letting this teaching go on, that was seen as spiritual adultery. The message was clear. Judgment is coming, and it's going to be swift and public.
But again, there's a promise for the faithful. And you've got to love the irony here. They were worried about being compromised by the pagan nations all around them, right? Well, the promise is that if they hold firm, they won't just survive. One day they will actually rule over those very nations, sharing in the final victory. Talk about a reversal.
All right, on to our last case study, Sardis. I call this one the zombie church. From the outside, it looked like a total success story. It had this great reputation, it had everybody fooled. But inside, the reality was grim. Yeah, look at this contrast. Sardis had perfected the art of looking good. They had a reputation for being alive. But their compromise, probably to avoid any trouble, had led to a total spiritual shutdown. The lights were on, but nobody was home. And this quote, man, this has to be one of the most chilling lines in the whole book. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Just wow. It's so direct, so brutal. It's saying their entire public image was a lie. Exactly like a zombie, moving, functioning, but totally dead on the inside.
So the command is just as blunt. Wake up. And that phrase, like a thief in the night, echoes Jesus' own teachings. It's meant to be a shocking jolt, a wake-up call to a community that had just fallen asleep at the wheel. The message? Judgment will hit you when you least expect it.
But even in this zombie church, there was a small group who hadn't given up, a faithful few. And for them, there are three incredible promises. The first one starts with this powerful symbol of purity and victory. They'll be dressed in white.
Second, they're promised total security. You got to remember, in their world, your citizenship, your status, it could be taken away just like that. So this was the ultimate guarantee. Your name in the book of life is permanent. It's never getting deleted.
And last, but definitely not least, the ultimate affirmation. Think about it. Instead of chasing approval from the culture around them, their names would be publicly acknowledged, honored, at the highest level you can even imagine. We're talking a personal shout-out from God himself.
Okay, so we've looked at these three really different, really intense performance reviews. So what's the big takeaway when you put them all together? Well, a super clear pattern starts to emerge.
And this is it. This is the core takeaway. It's basically a three-step blueprint for how to handle cultural pressure. And it works no matter what your specific problem is. Whether it's internal compromise like in Pergamum, a charming deceiver like in Thyatira, or just straight-up apathy like Sardis. The playbook is the same. Wake up, clean house, and hold on for dear life.
And that really brings us to the essential question, doesn't it? These communities, they faced this with everything on the line, life or death. They were wrestling with how to be in their world without being completely consumed by it. And that question, man, it still hits home today. In a world that's always pushing you to conform, where do you draw the line between fitting in and completely losing who you are?